Hello and welcome back everyone. Let's focus on Great Britain, Kenya, the Sahel alliance of Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and the issue of de-dollarization which we had already touched upon in our previous installment. The common link among these geopolitical subjects is their mutating role in the fading setting of the international framework of power relations, which used to be Western-controlled until now. Africa as a whole is facing its turning point from the centuries-old surrender of workforce and commodities to Europe and the US, while the UK belongs to the geographical area in which older welfare state concessions became obsolete and, today, without the former counterbalance of power that communism used to provide to the world, every social right acquisition by the population is being unilaterally terminated. The British economy fell into recession in the final quarter of 2023, according to official figures. The GDP dropped by 0.3% in the fourth quarter following a 0.1% decline in the previous quarter, according to the Office for National Statistics, ONS. A technical recession is typically defined as 2 successive quarters of contracting output. All 3 main sectors of the economy, services, production, and construction, posted declines in the fourth quarter, according to the ONS. For the whole of 2023, the economy has increased by 0.1%, which the ONS described as the weakest annual change in real GDP since the financial crisis in 2009, excluding the pandemic year of 2020.
Good morning, Belg Robert here. Same shirt, same day. A friend of mine, thanks Rob, sent me a for sale sign attached to a Tesco in Britain. I tackled Britain a little while ago and why it's in decline. I didn't realise quite how in decline it is. More millionaires leave Britain every year than anywhere else in the world. They're hiding their wealth. Millionaires are rats. Rats will go wherever the food is. Rats will protect their situation no matter what. And rats leave a sinking ship when they know it's sinking. And Britain is hemorrhaging rats at this moment in time. Millionaires, people make a lot of millionaires. They call them wealth creators. They're not. They're wealth protectors. They made their money, and now they financialise themselves. They don't actually contribute to the economies. If they did, then the countries where all the millionaires like to go and hide themselves, the USA, Monaco, is that a country? Tax havens, whatever, would be some of the wealthiest industrialised countries in the world. But they're not. It's the opposite. The millionaires leave the industrialised countries, and they hide their wealth amongst friendly tax regimes. So the effect of this is to impoverish the nation, but not in the way that you think. Millionaires don't impoverish the nation by taking their money offshore. They've already impoverished the nation by not recycling it into the economy. Having millionaires in your economy is not a sign of strength. It's a sign of corruption. If they were taxed properly, they would want to stay in the places where they make their money because those would be nice places to live. Monaco is very nice to live in, precisely because they tax people indirectly on purchases and on rentals and purchases of apartments and things like that. They don't tax them directly. That's why they like to go there. You can go there with many, many millions. If you spend that money in Monaco, which is a country which is about 2 kilometres squared, it all goes back into making Monaco a nice place to live in. A council tax, which is very rich, I have to say. That's why they go there. But the money itself isn't from Monaco. Monaco doesn't produce anything. Monaco is a town. So what they're really doing by leaving the countries that they come from and hiding their money is they're impoverishing the system that made them rich in the first place. And this was a basic fundamental thing that they don't really understand. They don't really care. The system isn't theirs. They just exploit it. They don't want to change it. They just want to exploit it and live well. Why not? If you make your money, spend it. That's the dream. That's what everybody wants to do. But these millionaires are losing their value, especially if they hold dollars or pounds. Inflation is going to take care of their millions. They need to buy land. They need to buy land. They need to buy industry in order to protect their wealth. So what will eventually happen is that these millionaires, and the billionaires are already doing it, will buy up land, which is a political entity. It's owned by people. It's taxed by the state. And they will eventually have to feed the people that belong to them. And we return to a situation of feudalism. This is where we're going. Britain is becoming a feudal country again. No political rights for anybody, just the ownership class controlling their wealth. So elite migration doesn't matter, because the system will change into a feudalist system with lack of opportunity for most people, and you will own nothing and be happy.
Featured news. Kenya to borrow more after new taxes withdrawn, President. July 1, 2024. Source, Africa, latest news and updates, BBC News. Kenya's President William Ruto says the country will have to borrow more to keep the government running following the rejection of a hugely unpopular finance bill that was going to raise more money in taxes. The president said he would withdraw the bill containing controversial tax hikes last Wednesday after deadly protests that saw Parliament set on fire. But on Sunday he said dropping the bill had set the country back 2 years, as he explained the difficulty of being unable to raise extra taxes while facing a huge debt burden. He said this meant Kenya would have to borrow 1 trillion Kenyan shillings, about $7.6 billion or 6.1 billion British pounds, just to be able to run our government. This is a 67% increase on what had been planned. But he also said he was considering cuts in spending across government, including in his own office, as well as reducing allocations to the judiciary and the county governments. Many protesters objected to the tax rises by saying that the extra money would be wasted. The extra taxes were supposed to raise about 350 billion shillings, while about 600 billion was going to be borrowed. According to the president, the proposed tax measures were part of efforts to cut the debt burden of over $80 billion, some 63 billion British pounds. About 60% of Kenya's collected revenues go to servicing debt. I have been working very hard to pull Kenya out of a debt trap. It is easy for us, as a country, to say, let us reject the finance bill. That is fine, and I have graciously said we will drop the finance bill, but it will have huge consequences, the president said while speaking to journalists on Sunday night. Mr. Ruto said the rejection of the budget would affect the employment of 46,000 junior secondary school teachers who have been on temporary contracts, as well as healthcare provision. He said the government would be unable to support dairy, sugarcane, and coffee farmers, including by paying off debts owed by their factories and cooperative societies as had been planned. He however said he was considering the issues that had been raised by those who opposed the finance bill, such as cutting spending by his office and scrapping budgets for the First Lady and the Deputy President's spouse. The president's latest remarks about more borrowing have faced criticism, with economist Odhiambo Ramogi telling the BBC that it was not necessary or prudent to borrow more as this would put Kenya in a greater position for debt distress. He said the president's remarks on reducing spending lacked commitment as he had signed the spending plans into law last week. He said that MPs would absolutely need to revise the budget. There has been a similar discussion on social media. Why do we need to borrow 1 trillion shillings and still fail to employ the 46,000 teachers whose budget is 18 billion shillings? A Kenyan citizen asked on X, formerly Twitter. Despite the withdrawal of the finance bill, there has been continued anger against the government, with more protests planned for this week. The protesters are demanding more accountability from the government, with some calling for the president to resign. They are also aggrieved by what they see as insensitivity by the government to their plight and accuse the police of responding brutally to the protests. At least 23 people were killed and many others wounded, according to a doctors' association. On Sunday the president said the police had done their best they could. If there are any excesses, we have mechanisms to make sure that they are dealt with, he said.
Anger usually is the offset of the lack of hope. In social affairs, nobody masters the skills of survival with little or no hope than Africans. Even people from other regions of the so-called global south, like Latin America and most of Asia, have left their colonial past behind in somewhat more significant measure than Africa because local leaders, in Asia and Latin America, were able to unite their people against colonial and neo-colonial forces to a greater degree. Kenya is struggling against the very same fiscal constraint, euphemistically called fiscal discipline, that most national economies are confronting worldwide, the so-called austerity measures. These fiscal measures entail depreciating real value income for the wage earners, depreciating the reliability of the national currency by decreasing its financial value in terms of repayment of private and public debts, thus raising inflation, and subordinating the country's international trade to foreign issuance of reserve currencies. Kenya, as much as most other countries worldwide, needs to confront its long-neglected national duty and social right to issue sovereign money, instead of borrowing banking-issued monetary means intended to collect interest rates for the benefit of central bank shareholders, and their financial markets. The privately owned issuance of currency that currently still fuels money creation, worldwide, runs contrary to the people's financial sovereignty. As a historical lesson, it was to protect this kind of massive monetary scam that security agencies coalesced with financial elites in the U.S. to physically eliminate President J.F. Kennedy. The same fate for the same reason was found in Italy, a decade and a half later, by Prime Minister Aldo Moro. Today, in Africa but also Europe, austerity fiscal policies are being enforced above and beyond the people's control and will. This trend is an alarming signal of totalitarian regimes being planned to be forced upon us all in the not-distant future.
Okay, so turning to Kenya, let me start by expressing our deepest sympathy to the people affected by the tragic events in Kenya. Our hearts go out to those who have lost their lives, lost loved ones, or suffered injuries. With respect to Kenya's broader situation, I think it's important to say that the situation in Kenya reflects broader challenges facing many of our low-income members. Many of these countries are experiencing a funding squeeze, including on account of tighter global financial conditions and reduced availability of concessional financing. So policymakers in these countries, including in Kenya, face a complex balancing act. They have pressing spending needs in priority areas, such as social programs, health, and education. They're managing rising public debt and debt service, and they also have the challenge of boosting domestic revenue. For Kenya specifically, the goal of our IMF-supported program is to help establish sound macroeconomic fundamentals, and these are crucial for fostering sustainable and inclusive growth in the country, crucial for generating jobs for the Kenyan people, including Kenya's young population. We are currently working with the authorities to ensure that these objectives can be met, and we recognize that there's a careful balance between providing public services and securing adequate financing. Our program also includes initiatives to improve governance and transparency and to ensure responsible use of public funds, to safeguard social programs and social spending, particularly to protect the most vulnerable members of society. It's also important that these policies that are under discussion go through a process of broad consultation so they can gain broad public support. We remain committed to supporting Kenya in its effort to achieve inclusive growth. At every program review, we do take the opportunity to assess developments and make adjustments considering the evolving circumstances. And that's exactly what we're doing in our active and constructive discussion with the Kenyan authorities. And we're confident that we will be able to find a balanced path forward with Kenya.
Featured news. Great turning point, senior Malian official on creation of Confederation of Sahel States. July 9, 2024. Source, Sputnik Africa. On July 6, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger signed a charter establishing the Confederation of Sahel States during the inaugural summit of the heads of state and governments of the AES in Niamey. They also agreed on establishing an investment bank and a stabilization fund for the Confederation. Mali took over the presidency of the Union for 1 year. The recent creation of the Confederation of Sahel States is a great turning point in the lives of the people of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, a senior Malian official said in an interview with Sputnik Africa. Since the creation of the Liptako Gourma Authority, an organization uniting the three countries, created in 1970, this was foreseeable, said Fousseynou Ouattara, the vice president of the Malian Transitional Council's Defense and Security Commission. But unfortunately, the previous leaders did not have enough authority, enough decision-making at their level to get rid of certain pressures and to go for this union, Ouattara stressed. Today, we can say that the three countries of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, have completely left the orbit of the former metropolis and are independent thanks to the support of true friends, including Russia, China, Turkey, and Iran. Ouattara believes that Russia will be able to make a great gesture and set up a Marshall Plan for the AES. I am sure that this space will be a very, very profitable market for Russian industries. I believe that the role that Russia can play will be decisive for our future, he stressed. Commenting on the U.S. Armed Forces withdrawal from the Niamey base in Niger, the Malian official said that it is better late than never. The U.S. presence in Niger has not served the Nigerians, it has not served the fight against terrorism, it has not served the development of the country, the vice chairman of the Malian Transitional Council's Defense and Security Commission said. According to Ouattara, Washington always wants to impose itself, always wants to dictate its will to others. Now handed over to the Nigerian authorities, Air Base 101 can be used to welcome our partners who are helping us on several levels, he added. I am sure that this place will not be empty. It will be a pleasure for me to see the technicians and assistants who are ready to accept our conditions for cooperation in the field of defense, in the military field, Ouattara said. On Sunday, the U.S. military forces pulled out of the 101 Air Base near the Nigerian capital of Niamey and officially handed it over to the West African country's authorities. The transfer of the site to the Nigerian side was signed by Niger's Chief of Staff, Mamane Sani Kiu, and U.S. General Kenneth Ekman. It is expected that the American side will organize the withdrawal of Agadez Air Base 201 by September 15.
The Sahelian three allies, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, are accomplishing a feat that no European NATO member is capable of dreaming about, despite Europe's centuries-old civilization and strategically crafted statehoods. These African countries are getting rid of the US and France's military presence in their national territories, peacefully. This is way more than any European NATO member country could claim to choose in the present international scenario, despite the increasingly evident blowback that NATO's membership is causing to the military sovereignty and prospective safety of the European peoples. Indeed, a forceful, punitive, and self-bestowed veto power allows the United States to prevent any chances of a European NATO ally from exiting NATO. This unilateral veto has never been established as a legally binding rule inside NATO, rather it is the result of the United States' financial, political, ideological, cultural, and military dominance of the European ruling classes and the general European citizenry. From being colonizers of Africa, Europeans are rapidly becoming colonies of the Anglo-American financial plutocracy, while Africa, starting from the Sahelian alliance, is making great strides forward against the endurance of the powerful Western-led economic oppression of Africa's lands and its people.
As you know, the world now is using the SWIFT system, and that SWIFT system is basically dominating. I am happy that BRICS is beginning to discuss how amongst themselves as the BRIC countries, using their own currencies, they will trade among themselves, but at the same time, they will gradually move towards introducing a system that will assist in making sure that you smoothen trade without necessarily having to rely on the SWIFT system and having to rely, for instance, on the dollar. Russia has made a very, through the Madam Speaker here, a very important proposal that one of the things that we must look at so that in the future we can be independent from the SWIFT trading system. They are suggesting that, and we support that as South Africa, that technology must be used to make sure that as the BRICS countries, we are able to enhance trade among ourselves, but also to force the world to trade with us using the new system that we will introduce in future, working together as BRICS countries.
Featured news. Dedollarization now underway because of U.S. policies, says Senate hopeful. June 26, 2024. Source, Sputnik International. Washington. The de-dollarization of the global economy is already underway, and it is happening as a direct result of U.S. policies, independent candidate for the U.S. Senate Diane Sare told Sputnik. I think that is happening. And it doesn't have to be that way, but because of our policies, I think people really don't have a choice, said Sare, who is running for one of New York's 2 U.S. Senate seats. When asked whether this process can be reversed, Sare said a rational U.S. government might be able to reverse the tide. Or maybe not. You know, maybe it shouldn't be, she said. Maybe it makes more sense to have a basket of currencies. Sare noted that 8-time independent presidential candidate Lyndon LaRouche, with whom she worked for 32 years, had called for fixed exchange rates to eliminate the ability of people to speculate against each other's currencies and destroy national economies. I think that if the United States would have a policy that was clearly intended by our founding fathers, by Hamilton, our first Treasury Secretary, by John Quincy Adams, even Lincoln or John F. Kennedy, this would not be happening. But at the moment it is, Sare added. In an interview with Tucker Carlson, Russian President Vladimir Putin called the U.S.'s use of the dollar as a foreign policy tool one of the biggest strategic mistakes by the U.S. leadership. Even American allies are now downsizing their U.S. dollar reserves, Putin pointed out. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said in February that the de-dollarization of Russia's foreign trade is underway, with about 90% of all mutual payments with China and about 50% with India being made in national currencies. U.S. Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller said that the U.S. dollar's dominance is likely to stay despite headlines about trade blocs, cryptocurrencies, and sanctions supposedly undermining its standing as the world's reserve currency. Highlighted. The U.S. could reform the global economy with Russia and China, were it not so hostile. The United States could cooperate with Russia, China, and other powers to transform the global economic system if it abandoned its hostility and financial warfare, independent candidate for the U.S. Senate from New York, Diane Sare, told Sputnik. I think really, if we were not so hostile to many nations, we would be happy to collaborate with Russia, China, other major economic powers, and Japan, to reorganize the transatlantic system. If we don't do that and we keep putting sanctions on people and stealing their money, we're going to see what we are seeing, Sare said. Some countries are now abandoning the U.S. dollar and finding other means of trade that are more reliable, she observed. That's not because people are against the United States per se, but because they have no intention of having major disruptions to their economy because of financial warfare that we're trying to impose on them, Sare said. She also warned about a bubble of derivatives obligations held by London and Wall Street that is estimated at $2 quadrillion. Sare called it sort of a driver of the war and rejected the idea that the U.S. can still be the global hegemon somehow by military force, even though that's not working out so well either. We're going to have to face the fact that there is not $2 quadrillion to meet these obligations. And this is where the government can step in and sort through the banks, she stated. At a plenary session of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that the U.S. is breaking its own tool of greatness, the U.S. dollar. The U.S., with its own hands, is pushing global economic players away from the dollar, he noted. The shift from the dollar will happen anyway due to the shrinking of the American economy, but the U.S. is accelerating this process, Putin said. Highlighted. Seizing Russian assets, to backfire on Washington, and deter business with the U.S. The seizure of Russian assets in the West will create blowback for Washington as it will increase other nations' mistrust of the United States and deter business with the country, independent candidate for the U.S. Senate Diane Sare told Sputnik. This is like our brilliant sanctions. Everything that we're doing in this way is just going to backfire, and that's what I'm saying about the delusional quality of some of our policymakers, Sare, who is vying for one of New York's 2 seats in the U.S. Senate, said. Sare likened the situation to one in which people put money in a bank that ultimately steals the funds. Pretty soon no one would want to put their money in the bank, she explained. So, if we are going to arbitrarily say that we can seize people's assets, then pretty soon, no one's going to trust us, and no one will want to have any business with us. I think that's sort of obvious, but somehow these people can't consider it.
Geopolitical tectonic shifts are impending throughout the entire range of human social frameworks, more specifically, banking-led monetary issuance to feed privately accrued financial profits is the social allocation device facing the most consequential changes. Signs of systemic crisis point to the so-called liberal market economy as the main source of trouble. Increasingly, at a global scale, material scarcity in household consumption has resulted from the deindustrialization of economies due to the financialization of investment assets. Welfare state politics, the main guarantor of social equity in economic appropriation and accumulation, has almost lost its assertiveness and accountability. The ongoing geostrategic landscape appears to suggest that, once again, international economic growth has turned against peaceful governance among nations, as if the financial and trade liberal competition had ever more morphed into security and military concerns, moving toward an impending stage of creative destruction. Euphemistically, such a creative destruction would be nothing else than human lives sacrificed and assets obliteration. Dear friends, that's all for this international news package. Subscribe to the channel to help us produce and tailor content to the incoming news. YouTube will also inform you about the next posting of our videos on international news. If you like this content, remember to press the thumb below and share this video. Thank you very much for your valuable attention. Until next time.